Here we have his cohort, David Jones, a retired U.S. State Department Senior Foreign Service Career Officer with us right now. Welcome, David. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. I'm fine. However, we are awaiting the greatest blizzard of the century, or so to speak, that is supposed to bury us Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So right now, a beautiful day, but we're waiting to start shoveling.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
think we were in Ottawa?
Well, I'm glad we got you on a good day before that hit. So, David, I wanted to do a tour with you, like I was going to do with David Kilgore as well, and go through some of the Asian countries and find out what's going on lately. And I'll take a first stop over at North Korea. We got a lot of activity over the last few weeks from all Kim Jong Un. I know a couple days ago he came out with hangover-free alcohol, but he's been up to other stuff too. What's going on over there in North Korea?
Well, I mean, I can't repeat the old Churchillian riddle about Russia, but certainly North Korea, for as long as I have ever dealt with the country, has been all but impenetrable. You simply do not know who is doing what to whom, when, how, or what they're going to do next. But as you point out, I mean, with their latest iteration of a generational leadership with Kim Jong-un, we are even more in the dark. This man is still exceptionally young, but at the same time, he's proved to be almost wildly erratic. The stories of him eliminating substantial numbers of his personal family by mowing them down with 50 caliber machine guns sounds beyond belief. But if you're still thinking about North Korea, it's not beyond belief.
Huh.
The problem isn't that he is, maniacal or maybe demented. The problem is that he's also nuclear armed. If he were, let's say, Malta, it wouldn't matter what he did. But when he has nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver them and the potential to move from nuclear weapons to hydrogen bombs, this becomes a very serious concern.
Here's one of the questions that's always tough for people. Should we really take him seriously? Are these all just posturing for his followers in North Korea, for the people there? Or is this actually something he may do someday, or do we actually just don't know?
Well, there's an old intelligence maxim that you don't measure intentions, you measure capabilities. I mean, intentions can change minute to minute. Capabilities are there. And the capabilities that North Korea has so far as, say, dramatic nuclear action are certainly potentially there. Whether I do not believe that the Kims, say, generationally, had any real reason to try to impress their population. Their population is about as subservient and repressed as any population conceivably could be. What he's doing is he's impressing the world. He has moved from being a know-nothing state at the end of the world in Northeast Asia to being a player. And as a result, he must be taken seriously. What kind of a deal he wants to strike and under what circumstances and with whom, we don't really know. We can hypothesize, but we don't know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I guess that's the best we'll get for now. Poor Kim Jong-un there. The question I have for you now in regards to North Korea, I heard something, I don't know if you're aware of anything, I've heard some kind of dealings with North Korea and maybe Iran or maybe Russia. Is there something going on with those guys?
Well, once again, you have, say, these pariah states that in one way or another have, have useful linkages one with the other. There are people that fully believe that the North Koreans were major actors in the Pakistanis developing a nuclear weapon. They appeared to be potentially major actors in an effort that the Syrians were making some years ago to develop nuclear capability. and they have connections with Iran. So here we have a situation where the major product for export that the North Koreans have is nuclear technology. And there are certainly a fair number of states that are interested in obtaining this kind of technology, or at least supplementing the nuclear technology that they're already developing.
Interesting. That's a good point. Last question on North Korea, then we'll head over to China. So it kind of leads into China, but before we get to China, Donald Trump made a comment about a week ago, and he mentioned that China could really pressure North Korea, and they could make them behave any way they want. Do you agree with that?
No.
All right.
I mean, that's a can you trump that kind of answer? But the point is that for years and years, we have attempted to play a China card on North Korea. And the North Koreans are impervious to this kind of ostensible pressure. The Chinese, we believe, are not interested in seeing the North Koreans collapse, because that would mean that they would have a basket state right on their border, and maybe millions of potential refugees fleeing north across the Yalu. But although we have made efforts, clearly we have made efforts with the Chinese to moderate North Korean behavior, it is very difficult to see that we've had anything like the definitive results that we would want to get.
Well, let's head over to China. What's happening in China? I know their economy seems to be slowing down quite a bit. Do you see anything politically going on over there right now?
No, not in the kind of way that you might have seen or heard of in the past. The current Chinese Communist leadership is far more sophisticated and less bloody-minded than its predecessors. China has gone a long way since the 1960s and the Cultural Revolution, in which people by the tens, indeed hundreds of thousands, died in the process. We look at what's happening in China, and of course we've moved the goalposts. That we want them to get much better in the way of respect for human rights and development of levels of democracy. But it's also useful to recall that they are imprisoning their opponents rather than simply executing them. So far as the Chinese economy is concerned, they have performed spectacularly over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years in a way that nobody would have predicted. There was a little column by George Will in today's paper that said, in effect, in the last 10 years, the Chinese have poured more concrete in the form of building roads and buildings than the United States poured in the entire 20th century. I mean, that's an almost unbelievable statement.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it shows the tremendous economic development that China has had over the last quarter century. I mean, when they talk about, their economy is doing so poorly, it's only going to do 6.9%. I mean, you take a deep breath and say, that's about 3 times what we're expecting our economy to run at. And this is a breakdown, a problem for the Chinese. And, of course, it is, because they're attempting to keep 1.4 billion people happy and, say, not restless. And the way in which they did it was, in effect, to make the implicit bargain that we will improve your life immensely if you just stay quiet and peaceful and not say anything in the way of criticizing leadership or rocking the boat politically. But if the Chinese economy sags further, the implicit bargain may begin to fray. And this is what nobody really knows. Is this a sort of one-time or short burst of economic problems where their stock markets going south at high speed, say, affected everybody around the world. I think the U.S. Stock market lost something like $2 trillion in the first couple of weeks of 2016. So what is happening in China is of immense importance to us.
Absolutely. I don't know. Maybe we talked a little bit too much about North Korea, David J. and David Jones, and it looks like maybe they sabotaged our ability to talk to David Kilgore.
Well, say maybe the kangaroos got him.
Maybe the kangaroos got him. So we were talking about China. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, somebody mentioned, we had a question emailed to me earlier in the week before this episode. Steve from San Francisco wanted to know, does the aging demographic, is that going to cause a problem for China?
It certainly could. I mean, the Chinese spent much of a generation trying to create a one-child family, and that worked out well enough. It worked out too well because it has left is that that one child is now responsible for two adults and maybe even four adults if the wife's parents are involved in that. There was an old story that China is going to be the first country that's going to get old before it gets wealthy. And this is, again, potentially a problem. The Chinese have reversed course and now are permitting more than a one-child family. But that would, in its own way, take close to a generation to resolve. All of those new, yet-to-be-born second children have to grow up and take their place in the demographic situation.
That's a good point. I like that. And before, I want to talk a little bit more about upcoming Asian countries that you think we should be on the look for. And before that, and after that, I wanted to discuss what you and David Kilgore have been writing and where we can go to find more information. But before that, what other Asian countries should we be keeping an eye on? Is Vietnam somebody we should be looking at?
Well, I would show considerable interest in Taiwan. Huh. As you have undoubtedly noticed, Taiwan, elected a woman president for the first time just a little earlier this past week, and she not only defeated the longtime powerhouse party on Taiwan, but she's also at least tentatively connected with an independence movement for Taiwan, which would certainly disconcert the Chinese. Now, there are many people that would say where you sit is where you stand, and Taiwan's desire to get into a direct confrontation with China over its desire to be independent is probably not going to come to pass. But nevertheless, the Taiwanese have been one of the Asian tigers and have been highly productive economically. So I would keep an eye on how this evolves, because the Taiwanese election was decided primarily on the fact that their economy has sagged a bit, and there was the feeling that they had gotten too close to China, and the Chinese had picked up a lot of the products and a lot of the exports that Taiwan had previously been using. So there's rising tension between Taiwan and China.
Interesting. I'll have to keep my eye on Taiwan then. Anybody else out there in the Asia Pacific?
Well, again, the entire range of Southeast Asia has a substantial amount of economic power and growth. The Vietnamese have managed to make America forget about the fact that we lost 50,000 dead during a war there. For some reason or another, all of the old Vietnam hands are now, with gray beards and things of that nature, and there's a reasonably substantial desire to forgive and forget. Among the Vietnamese, they dislike the French more than they dislike the Americans. And after all, they beat us both. So, I mean, when you're the victor in a war, you usually are willing to be magnificent to the defeated, and the Vietnamese realize that they have good potential markets with us, and they are doing well. But each of the Southeast Asian countries, even as tiny a country as Singapore or else, the Asian countries have Southeast Asian countries have much to be noted. The Burmese now seem to be moving toward a democracy in a way that has been tentative and not been as persistent as one would want, but nevertheless, Burma is moving out of the dictatorship stage and moving more strongly toward a democratic area.
That's interesting. Here we go. So there's a lot of activity out there in the Asia Pacific.
Absolutely, and some of it is stimulated, and some of it is problematic because of Chinese interest in projecting power into the South China Sea. I mean, we look at it very differently than the Chinese. We say that they're well outside of international law parameters, and we project them going to consultative agreements or going to international court of law. But the Chinese don't see it that way. Little Chinese children for decades, indeed for generations, have been taught that this is their area, and they were deprived of this area because of Chinese weakness at the end of the 19th and throughout the early parts of the 20th century. They just see their action in the South China Sea as getting their own back.
Are any of the countries in the Asia Pacific, have you seen any kind of increased activity with them in the Middle East and everything that's going on over there? So I heard something about, it was interesting, actually. I'll mention this comic just to show people sometimes what happens in American media. A couple of months ago, Ben Carson had mentioned that the Chinese were going to go to Syria. They mocked him for a very long time, but my research team found an article a month before Carson had mentioned that China was actually planning to send troops to Syria. What kind of what information do you have in regards to that? Anything going on there with China and Syria?
No, I don't have anything that would substantiate that. I mean, the Chinese are interested in everything everywhere, but the Chinese are most interested in economic opportunities and trade deals and natural resource agreements and extraction of this nature. They want secure oil supplies from wherever in the Middle East oil will be produced. As you read in my article, the Chinese in the past have been quite willing to provide intermediate range ballistic missiles to the Saudis, which leaves a lot of people head scratching and wondering what this could lead to or what it was intended to lead to 20 years ago and 10 years ago when it happened.
I never even heard that story. That's kind of concerning.
Well, it was in my last Epoch Times article, sir.
Oh, that's right. You did write about that.
Yeah, right at the very end where I talked about the question of, nuclear capability for Iran, but
right.
In juxtaposing it with Saudi Arabia, that's not to think that the Saudis will lack a counterforce.
Yeah, I remember reading that because I was wondering, that's kind of weird because Russia is playing nice with Iran and China playing nice with Saudi, but China and Russia are also pals. And when I was reading that article, I remembered, well, why would they do that? It sounded kind of like an affront to Russia.
Well, of course, they did it some while ago. I mean, these systems, and there are two types of intermediate range ballistic missiles that the Saudis have. These missiles, it wasn't as if they were supplied yesterday. So they are there, and they are operational. They are well embedded and protected. Presumably, they're still getting maintenance and upgrading from Beijing. But what this has to do with Chinese and Russian relationships, I doubt whether it impinges on it for a moment.
Well, David, we got about a minute or two left, and I want to make sure everybody knows where they can read those wonderful articles that you have written. I think you've co-written them, most of them, with David Kilgore, if that's correct. I'm not sure if you've done any on your own.
Yes, I mean the articles that David Kilgore and I have been writing go back a fair number of years now, but the most current access point for them is the Epoch Times, EPOCH Times, and I understand that the Epoch Times, which is a free distribution, is available in Los Angeles.
Oh, fabulous! Epoch Times.
It's in news boxes. It's one of these free newspapers, and it comes out regularly. But David and I are in something like every other week, and we were just in their most recently published January 21 to 27 edition.
I think you sent me the article yesterday.
Yes.
Absolutely. Epoch Times, everyone. That's where you can find more insight with David Jones and David Kilgore. David, thank you so much again for being here.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much, and enjoy much better weather in San Diego than we're going to get in Arlington.
Absolutely. Stay safe out there. I want to mention it one more time for everybody. The Epoch Times, where you can read the articles from David Jones and David Kilgore, tell you great insight, great analysis of what's happening.